Hello and welcome to this week's Common Sense Live. My name is Afshan D'Souza Lodi, and with me is my wonderful co-host, Messiah Twins. As usual, this week we've got a jam-packed episode for you with some top stories. We're going to have a little debate, a conversation, a discussion about Keir Starmer. So do let us know in the comments whether you like him, whether you dislike him, whether you remember the Labour Party. It's nearly Friday. It's cool. Whether you remember the Labour Party and whether you hate the Labour Party, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to share this link with your mates too. We are Common Sense Network. I forgot to mention that because I'm really tired today, and that's okay because
that's all right.
Life hits you, Messiah, doesn't it?
Listen, life hits you, and you know what? The world is opening up slowly but surely. So our mind is kind of figuring out, why is the weather a bit warmer? You know, why is there more people outside? So we're all feeling the same way. So don't worry, Afshan, we're all tired. We got this. We've been tired for 1 year. What's another day?
Thank you for that validation. That makes me feel actually. So we're going to go straight into it with our stories. But like I said, do share this with your friends. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments, whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether you think we're amazing. Messiah, babes, you're on mute. That's okay. Because it's always lovely to hear where people are listening from and viewing from. Straight into our first story. So this week on Monday, some of you may have already been aware that George Floyd's accused murderer, very important word, accused murderer of George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, a former Minneapolis police officer, his trial began, and this trial is expected to last about 4 weeks. One of the really interesting statements that came from this was from Chauvin's lawyer, and in the opening statement, he said that Chauvin's use of force was unattractive but necessary. The teenager whose video it was that actually went viral said that George Floyd was begging for his life as she filmed him, and states that she stays up apologizing to him for not doing more. Derek Chauvin, the police officer, the former police officer, pleaded not guilty to 3 charges: second degree unintentional murder, manslaughter, and third-degree murder. So this is a story that's probably going to be carrying on for quite a while, for about 4 weeks, and it comes almost a year after his death in May last year. Messiah, have you been following any of these?
I have, and I've been seeing the few bits that are happening. Just because there's a fine line between, just anticipating that there's no justice going to be had, and then also understanding what is the excuses, what is the rationale that's going to be made. And so, yeah, it's honestly, it's sad. And I think we knew this, and I think that's why people take protests very seriously, because they know this could be the only sort of resolution or understanding that you get from this, because the courts, as we know, don't always, rarely ever see what's happening for what it is, or charge the right people for what they're supposed to be charged for. So I guess, and again, I think we had it in last week's episode about protests, and this is why I stand by protests. If you're from a certain demographic or background, you know where your justice starts and stops, and so do what you can when you can. That's all I really got to say on that matter. It's honestly, it's a shame.
No, well said. Absolutely well said. I know that in the US anyway, they are slightly better at prosecuting police, whereas in the UK, since 1992, over 1,700 people have died in police custody, and not a single police officer has been charged with manslaughter or murder. So it's over, 1,700 people and not a single police officer has been charged. Has been ridiculous. Whereas in the States, there is still a history, there is still a culture of, thankfully, prosecuting police and charging them and stripping them of their powers, as it were, to pay for the crimes that they've done. The next story,
exactly. So the next story is today. I'm sure people have seen on their timelines, Instagram post, whichever it is, you've seen that there has been a report that has come out on, I guess it was supposed to tackle or investigate racism in the UK following last year's Black Lives Matter movement, the protest, which obviously made its way to the UK, as it always does. People around the world showing solidarity and also spotlighting racism that they feel in their own country. So as they do, governments say, we're going to look into this. They looked into it. They produced this 265-page landmark report, apparently landmark because it's supposed to change everything, which told us that although there was a whole movement last year that is dedicated to investigating racism or highlighting racism. We are not institutionally racist as a country. In fact, racism does exist, but somewhere it exists, but not here. So that's what the crux of the conversation allegedly was at first glance. Obviously, I haven't had the pleasure of reading all of it today because obviously it was a hectic day at work. But I do plan this evening to go through it line by line. As I said, yeah, there's
264 pages long. Okay, it's not like
it's a light read. A light read. You know what it is, Afshan? It's fiction. So I'll breeze through it. You know, when it's non-fiction, you might have to start looking at terminology. I'm sure it's going to be a light read. So I have a light read of that. They found there's no evidence that the UK is institutionally racist. And some backlash from Dr. Halima Begum states that it's deeply, deeply worrying that the Commission has denied the existence of institutional racism. And I guess many people agree, because not only is that an official document that people who have always denied racism can now refer to and say, hold on, even if you try to convince me, this document comes from the government. I believe what the government says. There's no racism. And potentially there have been, I guess, movements or projects that have been, green lighted in the past. What's the future of them, And again, we have to talk about it deeply, but obviously Brexit and many other things that's happened recently, it's clear that now there's some sort of scapegoatism that could happen. And I guess the MP Claude Webb tweeted in reaction to the report, calling the finding a slap in the face. So yeah, this is where we're at. Ashton, what do you think?
My favorite thing about this whole thing is that it's a report by the government so it's by the UK government about the government being like, nah, mate, we aren't racist. Like, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm pretty sure you're supposed to have an independent researcher that comes in to research whether or not your institution is racist. You can't, as the institution itself, check yourself and be like, let me think, not racist, let's move on. And there's some quite funny tweets that I kept seeing, which was like, they were quite cute, some of them, about the UK being, let's see if we've got them. I don't know, Torin, if you've got any of them up, because it'd be cool to see them if we can.
Is this your meme game?
It's do you know what? It's my millennial meme game, so it's not as like.
Yeah. It's not as sharp as Gen Z, no, but you've got a lot of us who can remember your references. We'll remember them.
This is it, isn't it? That it's like, what is this? How is the UK able to do this? How are we as a country able to be like, do you know what? We had a look and sorry, not racist. Whoopsie daisy. My favorite is like the UK to the UK. Oh, you're not racist. Don't say that, X. And I'm like,
yeah, innit? From me to me. From me to me. That's what I'm saying. I feel like it was. I was telling someone today that it feels like a Dear Diary entry. It doesn't seem like they were talking to us or anyone else. They just felt like, you know what, I've done the work on myself, and my therapist told me that I'm fine, and that's what I think that was. So yeah, I think this is your reference up here now, which is so funny. But yeah, it's a shame. Honestly, it's another kick in the face. I think at least understanding there was a protest last year, you would at least come to some sort of sympathy or consideration of what it looks like optically. You've had Meghan Markle interview, which I know seems like ages ago now. The Queen is in hiring a diversity disaster. So someone's going to tell the Queen that, hold on, you don't need to do that no more. We're not racist. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of things here that's happening. And in the context of a lockdown, Afshan, do you know what I mean? People are tired, people are stressed. And it just reminds you of the whole NHS 1% pay rise, where it's like, is it just this shameless situation? You've also said, sorry, clearly I'm passionate about this. You know what I mean? There's few things that get me moving, because you feel like you've seen everything, and then one thing clicks and you're like, really? Are you this mad? It's COVID-19 and the disproportionality of the victims, yes. Especially the essential workers, have been Black and brown people. You've done all of that. Then you talk about vaccination, saying you understand why historically we don't want to get vaccinated. You've done all of that work to now come back and produce this. Do you know what I mean? It just seems like, so now I feel like I want to know what the processes were in place, who was involved in it, and what did you really do? Because if you see some of the names, and a few people from the academic field will remember certain names, there's certain people they've hired for this commission who we know look like very many Black and brown people, but have always had certain views of our experiences, which in my opinion, everything is valid, because not all Black and brown people have the same experiences. However, you do know what you're doing when you hire certain people to say certain things. So I would just like to know what the process was in that, and what now that there's no racism, what does the government plan to do? Nothing? Like, are we all right now?
The other thing is that it just reiterates this idea that we need to move away from banding all minority ethnic people together. So this idea of like BAME needs to be gotten rid of, Because actually, you know, one of the things that have come out of the report is that education, for example, or pay rises, or the pay gap between all ethnic minorities and white majority population has shrunk. And that's because there's a massive pay disparity within the ethnic minority communities. In that, you know, you've got, I think the highest paid person is like an Indian man, and then you've got like Pakistani, then Caribbean, then African, and then Bangladeshi or something. And that just reiterates the fact that even within the BAME kind of like there's an issue. So it might be that, you know, Indians are on par with white people, and they kind of bring up the percentage. But the actual fact is there are still issues that need to be addressed, and banding everybody together in one minority ethnic band is not going to help.
Exactly. And I did see in the report, it spoke about there's certain progress that we've made, as you said, like in the medical or law fields, and they call them elite fields. But everyone that we know or that you've seen in those fields, there are still levels, as you said, like medicine, it goes from essential workers to like GPs. So it's like, there might be so many of us. And there was a chart, it's just on Instagram, that showed all different, you know, demographics and people, ethnicities that work there, but what their levels are. Essential workers. So it's funny how in both ways we can be pulled up, quote unquote, but technically don't try and disband BAME because of this particular report. This report does it in a very weird way where, yes, if you're in favor of disbanding BAME, you could be like, yeah, it makes sense. But actually, I have a feeling it's more about a divide and conquer and trying to make the data look more presentable, then rather saying, actually, this is very inconsiderate. Because there are missing groups in this conversation that I've never, ever seen. Where do you fit into this? Which seems, because it always seems to be a hyper visibility on the Black or brown demographic, but the white demographic, we're not really seeing, do you know what I mean, the breakdown of that as well. So it's an interesting piece, which I do plan to skim through, at least. I'll tell you where I get to. Maybe if I read the first half, Afshan, you can read the second half.
I have to wash my hair tonight. Sorry.
I see where your priorities lie. Do you know what I mean?
I'll log on to Twitter and I'll take the memes in instead.
Dude, that's
the easiest way to digest.
I accept.
Moving on from one issue with race, and earlier we were talking about protests, another top story for this week is about the Met Police Watchdog Review. And this is following sort of the carried on protests that have been happening this week and last week in Manchester and in Bristol. The watchdog says the Met Police acted appropriately at the Sarah Everard vigil in Manchester. And this is Priti Patel is sort of saying that the images can be taken out of context. Torin, can we bring those images up, please? Just trigger warning, they are quite difficult to watch, some of them, and to look at. So this is an image in Manchester taken of a woman who's being manhandled by the police. There's been a lot of comments around this image being similar to an image in 2011 from Cairo, which sort of led or created the Blue Brown movement in Egypt. And this is another picture, 2011 in Cairo. And I remember when that was happening, the way that the UK held itself up and the West held itself up as, we don't treat our citizens like that. And a lot of people come to this country on the idea that, you know, the police are safe and the police don't treat our citizens like this. And then we see in Manchester just over this weekend that a woman has been treated in very much a similar way. And the police watchdog is saying that the police have acted appropriately. There's a lot of videos circulating actually about the misconduct, I think, from the police, both in Clapham Common in 2 weeks ago, and then recently in Manchester last week and in Bristol the week prior. The images are really difficult to look at, and, you know, given what the movement is about and what the protests are about women's rights, it feels quite difficult to look at. Messiah, what do you think about that?
It's terrible, because people that normally talk about these protests or any protest that's happened, they always talk about the small pockets of conflict that happen, and they say how some protesters, you know, what their role in it. But in my head, no one's ever really come forward with the idea of, like, or really convincingly to say, you know what, why aren't they better trained? If we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, they've only had one trick pony training, then they could still come out and say, you know what, that was handled not in a very nice way. We felt we had to do that given the skill sets of our police officers. And maybe it's a case of increase your skill, learn. You're going around different countries, destabilize, well, you know what I mean? Well, in my opinion, going around to different countries, there's certain things that other countries have modeled their police force after.
Yeah.
And you're giving advice there, but also, why don't you also move the times and learn how to disarm people without it resorting to this? Do you know what I'm saying? So there's many things that they're not willing to change that for me just sounds like it's a sad conversation. And as you said, it's hard. You're debating about police brutality ultimately, and disregard and scandal, but you have to face the police while you do it. I don't know any other incidents where you have to face the person you think is oppressing you in at the same time. It just feels a bit like read the room. But I don't know. What do you think the future is for, I guess, the police force in the UK, since tensions are really high and anticipating lockdown ending? People are going to be in the parks more. This is really where, and I started to think myself that actually the timing is perfect for this kind of bill, because not only are we coming out of lockdown, we're now going to have certain restrictions. So we're going to be seeing the police under the guise of COVID distancing, but should they not like what they hear, that's a protest. So me and you can't go for a coffee, Ashan, and start talking about things like this, because we got to be ready to get arrested.
No, sorry, if there's one more, if there's another black woman or another person of color, then we're a gang. So technically,
yeah, exactly. So just be careful. Yes, I think if we go 2 men up, I don't know what we are. Maybe threat to humanity, but a gang, God forbid, a gang.
If you get a hijab in there as well, if I put on my hijab, then we might.
That's the thing. I was going to say.
We don't event on us either. We need to be really careful about all this stuff.
But we need to be careful. No, we do. And also bras. Remember what bra we should wear, because we will get, do you know what I mean? So this is, and honestly, we make jest, but it's sad, because you do have to think about those things when you're standing up for what you believe in. Like, what am I wearing? Because this could go left. So, what am I wearing? How can I mitigate against any of these dangers that we're also saying that we shouldn't have to defend ourselves against? You know what I mean? So it's really sad. And someone here has written, this was the first time I saw, as Torin wrote, this is the first time I saw videos of the UK police, and I thought it was videos of the US. It's crazy.
I think the most annoying part of this is how weak the responses have been from the police. So the Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services said that the force was justified in deciding that the risks of transmitting coronavirus were too great to ignore, and that the officers did their best to peacefully disperse the crowd. And then they said that we stand by our view that the circumstances the Met Commissioner got the judgment on the vigil badly wrong. There was insufficient communication between police commanders about changing events on the ground. So basically, there was no WhatsApp group between the police on the ground, and they didn't know what they were doing or what was happening. And that's their argument, is that, sorry, insufficient communication is not a good enough argument when you're supposed to be a force of that way. You asked earlier about what I think the future of the police is, and there was a really interesting comment that I saw last week, which was, we need to change it from being a police force to a police service, because that's what it is. It's a service, not a force, and the way that it's being dealt with right now is a police force. And speaking of politics, and speaking of policing and government, and it's just a heavy one today, isn't it? It really is. We're nearing Easter, guys. We're nearing there, but we've got a really interesting topic to talk to you about today. This is about Kier Starmer. Introduce our dear Kier Starmer.
Yeah, we need a little jingle. Do you know what I mean? Like Kier Starmer. I don't know, but something. We could see, yeah, we can make it up. But yeah, I guess today's top discussion today is, as Ashran said, discussing Keir Starmer. And is he a secret Tory? Now, some of you may be wondering why such a question, what has motivated this? But I think from our general discussions, I'm sure people have seen, in and out, from the moment he was running to be the leader of the Labour Party to now, there's been a lot of discussion, actually. What has Keir Starmer done? Has he been the saviour of the Labour Party that many people anticipate him to be? Is his difference between him and Corbyn something that we should champion? Or are we now in the midst of, protests and COVID-19 and race commission, expecting more from a Labour leader, actually, after all? And it wasn't just about Brexit. Maybe there was more to the world other than Brexit, for which he might be or might not be equipped for. And Easter Sunday, marks 1 year anniversary since he did become Labour leader officially. And as you know, lockdown is ending as well. There's a lot of firsts happening. And I think it's time for people to go, now we're back active and we can think about other things than our health and safety. What is there? There was a YouGov survey on the 15th of March that said 45% of respondents said Keir Starmer was doing badly. And only 32% felt he was doing well. So, you can start to see there's actually, after a year, Keir, you might not be the glory that the Labour Party thought you were. And I think there was a comment made by a Conservative supporter that referred to Keir as the greatest gift to Tories than over Jeremy Corbyn, which highlights that there's a great deal of maybe Conservatives or centrists who believe that actually we love this. It could be based on having two options that could work well for you. There's not really that line in the middle. Or it could be a case, that, yeah, we know we're going to win because Keir's not going to do anything. So we know we're always going to win and we're going to champion it. So, yeah, what's your thoughts, Asham? Just top of your head. Keir.
He's quite, I was going to say wet because I can't think of another word to put in. But he's not really done much. He's been in for a year. He's not really voted on anything important. He's abstained from voting on, COVID tiers, which affected me and based in Manchester quite a lot more. And sort of said that, this is in our national interest for us to carry on, so we're not going to vote against the restrictions in Parliament. And it just seems a bit like, oh, what are you doing, mate? You're supposed to be the leader of the opposition, not a Tory. But I think we should bring in one of our guests, Jack. Jack.
Hey, Jack.
You're on mute. Here we go.
There we go. I'm on mute now. See, what a mistake to make in the age of Zoom. I still keep myself on mute. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Doing well. What are your thoughts on Keir Starmer?
Well, so I think we're kind of maybe having two debates here, right? So first of all, is Keir Starmer a secret Tory? No, of course he isn't. I don't think he is at all. If you look back at his sort of Labour leadership election pledges, he reiterated multiple times that he is a socialist. He outlined a 10-point pledge that is very much in the ilk of the Jeremy Corbyn party, and this was the whole point of his campaign, was to put a sort of more respectable and electable face on the politics of Jeremy Corbyn. The other side of the debate has been the effectiveness of the Labour Party in opposition during the pandemic. And I'm a Labour member. I voted for Keir Starmer, and I'm incredibly disappointed in the way that the Labour Party has constructed their opposition to the government throughout the pandemic. I think that they've opted for this stance of backing the government in some areas and then trying to call the government out in other areas. And it's left them in limbo in many ways. The opposition are always going to have criticism. So on the one hand, you're going to have people say you're not being aggressive enough. And on the other hand, you're going to have people saying, this is a time of national crisis. You need to be, supporting the government and propping them up. You have to accept that some people are never going to like your kind of leadership. And that seems to be what Keir Starmer hasn't done. And when you don't announce policies, when you don't vehemently oppose the government, you leave yourself open for other people to fill the void. And now we're having these discussions. And that's for me where they've gone wrong. I want to see clear, precise policy. I want to know what a Labour government would be doing in the coronavirus crisis. I want to know what a Labour recovery would look like. And we don't have that. And as a Labour member, it's very difficult to get excited about the party on a national level when we don't have that kind of leadership.
Thank you, Jack. And do you think, just based on what you said, do you think there's an element of maybe wrong timing? I think there was a lot of pressure, but lots of media frenzy over Keir from all sorts of publications, whether you liked him or not, saying, either if you don't like Corbyn, Keir was going to be the saving grace. If you don't like Labour in general, it was still about actually, is he going to be a great opposition to hand Tories a victory later on? And we're going to be stuck in this kind of like one party, situation where you actually just vote for the same party, just different names. But do you feel like with the pandemic, because that's a big deciding factor, it feels like, in this context, do you think it's a case of him not being ideologically actually that different from the Tories technically, or do you think it's a case of actually he's trying to be very cautious about not overpromising and just focusing on supporting the government in their, I guess, approach to solving the lockdown or COVID crisis?
Yeah, I would say that it's probably more the latter. I think ideologically, if you sat down and went issue to issue between Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson, there'd be major differences. But I think that the strategy that they've taken in terms of their communications has meant that they haven't wanted to announce policies. They haven't wanted to go after the government in certain areas where, in my opinion, they should have. And I think that the coronavirus pandemic provided an opportunity for the Labour Party to say, this is how Keir Starmer's Labour Party would deal with the pandemic and hold the government properly to account, which is the job of the opposition over their decision making, because there has been, the pandemic is deeply political. The political decisions have led to the loss of life, and it's the job of the opposition, it's the job of the Labour Party to ensure that the government answer to that, and they haven't done that. So I think that it's about your perception of things. I think the pandemic, of course, raises difficulties for the Labour Party, but it also presents an opportunity to provide effective opposition, and that's where they've gone wrong, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Jack. Hamish, you've joined us now. I'm not sure if you heard the first part of our questions, but we were just talking to Jack about, actually, do you think that the pandemic has affected Keir's ability to lead the Labour Party into the new horizon? Or do you think he's actually just shown himself and not taken opportunity to distinguish himself from many Conservative supporters who actually don't mind Keir, because he hasn't really given the government a run for their money. He hasn't made, grand accusations beyond just the handling of COVID. He hasn't really showed us that actually you're different. It could have been anyone. Keir could have been anyone in Parliament at this point. What's your views on that?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I don't know. I actually like Keir. Actually, not gonna lie, I like him because he's moderate. Because I find Corbyn, for me, was a bit too extreme. That's why I liked him in the first place, of why he was going to take over the party. But I also find I think people are being a bit, in my eyes, a bit too early to judge him right now. I find that, let's not remember, we are talking about a leader that inherited a party that had the worst election results since 1934, a party that tolerated anti-Semitism, and all of this happening during a global pandemic. So I find that, as much as, yes, I think it's really easy for us to, let's say, criticize from the sidelines by saying, oh, someone should be doing this, he should be criticizing the government. But let's remember, a pandemic is, I think this is where I think the opposition it struggles, because it wants to criticize. However, it doesn't want to over politicize the crisis. It doesn't want a point score. And I find Starmer, he hasn't got his house in order in terms of the Labour Party. And he also is trying to find a way of not looking like it's politicizing the pandemic and not point scoring. So I find, in my eyes, I think it's a bit too early to judge Starmer right now. That's how I kind of view it.
Let me just hold on. I just want to ask you a question. So if not Starmer, then who? So if we're allowing Starmer to kind of not do all of this stuff, and we can, bless him, poor little lad, he's taken on this quite a really tough job right now. Who else is there? What else are we supposed to be doing? How are we going to criticize the government if not for protesting? And then also there's a protest bill that's now come in. What is it that who do we look to be criticizing the government in that way?
I think, well, maybe the Labour MPs themselves, in my eyes, because I think you have to look at the Labour MPs. I think some of them have actually been very critical of the government. I think it was it? I can't remember her name. I think was it Jess Phillips or someone? Was she part of Labour, or was she? Yeah. So I think she was very critical of the government in terms of, let's say, in terms of gender violence. So we're having the conversation with Sarah Everard. One of those people have been very, very critical. So I think either the Labour MPs themselves, with the backing of Starmer potentially, or without the backing, I think they should maybe also, stand up and, start critical, or even I don't know, even, we were speaking about this now. I think, speaking about the issues, like us, taking the priority in terms of criticizing the government, even being and just in terms of voicing our own opinions as well. I think we should do that as well. That's how I would criticize the government in that sense.
Perfect. Aaron, you've just joined us. Hope you've heard the beginning. Hope you're well. We're just basically talking about just a quick summary or brief of what you currently think of Keir Starmer at this point in time. Is he the God's gift, to partisan politics, or really is he just like a what do you call it, like a waiting room until we get someone else in Labour who can return it back to the Corbyn era?
Substitute opposition.
Substitute teacher, that's right.
Yeah, so it's a tricky one, because there's more than one way you can look at this. Even the most staunch Conservative person will have a hard time not being for him. Like Hamish said, we're in the middle of a pandemic. He's inherited the worst Labour defeat since, I think it's the 30s, apparently.
1934.
But a lot of people would say that it's more than one thing. Maybe it's less of a Starmer thing and more of a Labour thing in general, as I think that perhaps they need to get back in touch with their roots, which is the working class. It's not a coincidence that the working class almost overwhelmingly voted Conservative in the last election. So they may have to get back to their roots as to who they represent. There's also the idea of public image. Historically, Starmer is not an MP; he's a barrister by trade. And as a Labour leader, you kind of have almost, you could say, an obligation to look good to your voters. It's more to do with public perception and image. And a lot of people would say that because Keir Starmer is a typical socialist, which is a person who is maybe privately educated, he's everything that the modern working class despise, which is elite, metropolitan, London, Islington, So until they get someone that represents.
Have you lost him?
Way for a very, very, very long time because. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, you cut out a bit. Just finish what you said at the end. Sorry, Aaron.
I was saying that I think it's more than one problem. I think image is a big part of it as well. I think that Keir Starmer, to me, even as a conservative, to me, he is a soft, repackaged version of Corbyn. It's just the same thing. He's a socialist. He's privately educated.
Hold on. He cannot be a soft repackaged version of Corbyn because he hasn't voted in the same way that Corbyn has. And we take the spy cops as an example, where Jeremy Corbyn was very much against it because he believes that we must stand up. And this is a quote from him. I believe we must stand up for our core values of human rights and civil liberties. Whereas Keir Starmer was like, "Nah, mate, it's all right." And has just basically allowed it to carry on. So it's a really interesting position, I think, to take, to say that he's very much like Corbyn. I don't necessarily agree with that.
I think it's more of an image problem. It's more of an image because for a long time, the working class has been, let's say, crying out, but they seem to identify more as conservatives who are talking about actual things such as like keeping jobs, the economy, and this sort of stuff. Where the Labour seem to be in their own little socialist Islington bubble. And it's very elitist. And to some, until a quote-unquote private person is out and a public person is in, I don't think they're going to hold the majority for a while. I think it's partly a Starmer problem, but mainly a Labour problem. But Starmer is just so tame. He's just so bland, honestly. It's like when you go to the chip shop and you get just salt and pepper and no curry sauce.
But Aaron, you raise a good point. Sorry, Jack. You raise a good point in terms of saying there's a personality public perception that is really leading British politics at the moment. And it's never just, it's not just now, it's always led it. But I think now we've tried to kick out, not we, but let's just say the Labour Party tried to kick out Corbyn, thinking his personality was the issue, right? What he represented was the issue. You've now got someone like Keir who's here, but the personality issue just seems a bit more petty. It doesn't seem as aggressive as it was to Corbyn. Keir's not being wiped through the media in the same degree Corbyn was for the same types of issues we're talking about, which is public perception. So I don't know, Jack, what do you think about the difference between how Keir and Corbyn have been presented as leaders? Is there a real difference, or are we just biased?
Well, I think, first of all, I wanted to just pick up on a couple of things that Aaron said, because to suggest that the working class support the Conservative Party because the Labour Party is full of, London, Islington elites, something like 85 to 90% of the Conservative Party front bench went to private school. So to sort of belittle working class people and suggest that working class people vote based on the background of where politicians come from is, in my opinion, ridiculous. Working class people want to be given policies that are going to tangibly improve their lives. A poll was released 2 days ago, and it covered the reasons why people, particularly from the working class, disapprove of Keir Starmer. The majority of those people disapprove of Keir Starmer because they don't know what Keir Starmer stands for. It's got nothing to do with his background. It's got nothing to do with the fact that he was a barrister. It's got nothing to do with the fact that he was director of public prosecutions. Working class people, the Labour base, want to know how their lives are going to be improved under a Labour government. And until that happens, Keir Starmer won't have the support of working class people and of the Labour base. To come on to what you just asked, I think that we're still in the fairly early days of Keir Starmer's leadership, right? So because we don't know necessarily what he stands for, and because Jeremy Corbyn was so aggressive in arguing for what policies he wanted to see, it was almost the complete opposite way of leading. There is always going to be more opportunity to pick out Corbyn's viewpoints. And let's not forget, Corbyn's manifestos, both in 2017 and 2019, were torn apart in those elections by the right-wing press in this country. The government, this Conservative government, are now enacting policies that were in the Labour manifesto in 2017 and 2019. So, it's Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto. I don't like Jeremy Corbyn as a Labour leader. Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto, Jeremy Corbyn's policies are looking pretty sensible at the moment. The Labour leader is always going to be torn apart by the press in this country. That's something that you just have to accept and get over. The important point is effectively communicating your vision for the country, and that's the issue with Starmer's leadership so far.
All right, that's Jack. You made a few interesting points, which I feel like maybe someone like Afshan or more pro Corbyn or pro more left wing side of Labour would argue that actually it just comes from a biased point of view, which is fine. Everyone has an opinion, but I just feel like sometimes when it does come to Keir, because we know the reasons why people didn't like Corbyn, we can't apply them to Keir anymore. We kind of used up all the lifelines. It's like, no, it's not his fault. It's early, but it's been 1 year. And in this 1 year, Jack, it's been a very interesting year that could have handed him a personality check so easily. You've had the pandemic. All you really had to do was just insult the government and say, why now, give us. And he did sometimes say, go back to school, not go back to school. But I think it shows in times when you can't choose your manifesto or you can't act on your manifesto, this real life is actually where you judge politicians. So you can write a manifesto in isolation of actually what's happening in your life and try and convince people that way. But you've got a pandemic. During the pandemic, there's been a Black Lives Matter movement. There's been, climate change movements, right? There's been residual Brexit conversations. There's been now, I guess, a racism report that's come out. There's been so many different things in between. You've got a police bill that's come, There's Sarah Everard. There's so many things that actually would have easily allowed Keir, in my opinion, to step up and show his personality, or at least on the situations, side with whoever he needs to side with. But I just don't think he's taken that up, really. And I wonder.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go on, Hamish. I know you can speak. I was going to say, and I wonder whether that is us actually saying, you know what, maybe Keir isn't who we needed, but we like him. But maybe he's not who we needed right now, because right now we need someone who can distinguish between what is good policy, what is bad policy, what is good for people and what isn't good for people, rather than someone who likes the more vanity projects of life, who can say, actually, I would rather, build houses this way or that way. We just need the bread and butter of politics right now, because it is life and death, life and death situation. So yeah, Hamish, go on.
Yeah, no, sorry for interrupting you.
That's fine.
The thing is, I slightly disagree, because I find he has at times. I know he should do it a bit more often. He has at times criticised the government. For example, the whole 1% the whole National Health Service. There you go. Pay rise. I can't even speak today. Pay rise. He was actually on Twitter, even though yes, it was on Twitter. He was the one criticising it, right? He was also during the summer. He was the one criticizing contracts in terms of COVID stuff. He was also the one actually calling out the government, saying, look, why don't we work together in terms of schools, in terms of actually getting kids back to school. So to completely suggest that he hasn't criticized the government on certain things, I think it's a slight misrepresentation personally.
Where has he voted though, Hamish? Because Twitter's one thing, because I've also criticised the government on Twitter, but that doesn't make me qualified enough to be a leader of the opposition. I think the important thing is that he's in a position of power. He's able to vote on matters, but continuously and consistently he's abstained from voting, and this is the issue, that he's really tepid. Aaron in the comments has put this thing about it's not enough. He needs to be more than that. It's an opposition. He's not just any old MP that can tweet about it, that can kind of have a conversation and challenge from the sidelines. He's in a position of power. He should be able to create change in a way that perhaps Corbyn was doing. And maybe that's why, he's a bit like Marmite, Corbyn. You either love him or you hate him. And whereas Keir is he's really tepid, and that's probably the best definition. It's a Guardian kind of definition from it. Really, really tepid. But somebody said that he reminds a lot of people of Tony Blair. And I don't know whether it's a physical thing or whether it's a tepid thing. I have no idea. But there's this kind of nostalgicness to him, that we're all kind of stuck at home we're in lockdown, we're all exhausted, we're all tired. And we're just just another Tony Blair, let's just leave him and do his thing. Except the problem is that he's not doing his thing. He's not doing anything whatsoever. He's not even doing anything for us to hate him for. He's just doing nothing. And that's, we need movement right now.
It's a pandemic. What do you expect him to do? The thing is, this is the thing. And he also, Labour don't have many seats in the parliament either. So it's even if, he voted to trying to stop Conservatives from passing through, it's going to pass through anyway. So even if he votes on it, it's not really going to, stop stuff. If he doesn't vote on it, he's saying
you can't sit and abstain though. You can't be I'm going to lose, so I'm just going to sit on my hands and not do anything about it. The fact is that you're the leader of the opposition. You need to show action. Otherwise, what's the difference between you and my mum?
Exactly.
She can yell into her phone and be government's really shit. That's not doing anything. It's different. She can't be I'm gonna lose, therefore I'm not going to vote. That's a really shit argument. Sorry, Hamish, but
you've always in really interesting points, and it kind of brings me to that point again of what got Keir to his position isn't what's going to keep him there. And I think there was a level of what I guess the Labour seemed to have needed was that moderation. Everyone looked at moderation like that was the key to solve all ills in the world. And I think many people were quite tired from both sides of actually this extreme sides arguing all the time about things that was important but not productive for the Labour Party. And that's why there's questions about Labour splitting into the ideological factions. But now it's got to a point where it wasn't just strategic, it wasn't just his personality that stayed there. Actually, that's where he sits. He's a good figurehead leader, and the reasons why people talked about Tony Blair at the time, that was a time where the British politics was more or less the same, isn't it? We didn't really need anyone who was kind of like extreme in their ideology. We need someone who get things done. But we're in a different time now. Again, this is the internet world where if you don't say anything at the right time, you haven't said anything at all. If you're tweeting, but it's not on the publications or the other sorts of media, you haven't really said it. If I don't see a video of you in Parliament, making grand gestures, you didn't speak up. So he also needs to play to that as well. And I just don't understand why he's not doing it. But equally, it does feel again that there's been a way for people to kind of defend Keir to the point where it's like, where was that generosity to other people, including the Conservatives? Because if we're going to defend Keir in this way, then maybe it's been 1 year. So maybe the government's the first pandemic they dealt with, right? So maybe we could also say the government, needed 1 year. And then when you get into that territory, you start realizing actually your criticisms have no weight, if you see what I'm saying. So I feel like when it does come to Keir, I am worried that, it's more about being stubborn. You've got someone into power, and now it's like I have to defend him till I die because I voted for Keir, and Keir, you're not going to make me embarrassed, But Aaron, what do you think about that? Who do you prefer, Corbyn or Keir, and why?
I mean, it depends. It depends how you look at it. If I'm a conservative person myself, I'll probably say the longer people like Corbyn or Keir are in, then the better it'll be for the Conservatives. Like you said earlier, it's a gift basically. As long as it's a bit like when you watch football and you say, as long as this team has this manager, they're gonna play rubbish.
Oh,
basically,
wow.
I think a bit like this, right? Labour Party is Chelsea, and Starmer is Frank Lampard. That's the way I see it, honestly. But no, I mean, Keir Starmer just seems to be. He got sacked though, but Keir Starmer just seems to be so bland, in my opinion. He doesn't seem assertive enough, even for an opposition party member. He doesn't seem to have I don't know what word to use, the testicular fortitude to really push Boris and the Conservatives, or at least not enough to make them think twice about what they're doing. He seems very timid, out of his depth. It wouldn't surprise me if Labour voters eventually wouldn't have any confidence in him as a leader. It's a lot about how you're viewed by the public as well, because I remember a couple of years ago when I think it was Piers Morgan when he was on Good Morning Britain, and him and Susanna had to really push Diane Abbott to ask her about, if there was a nuclear threat, would you push the nuclear button? And they said no, they wouldn't push it. So it's like, people are going to ask these questions. People are concerned about these things, It's about what would you do if you're in this situation? It's about how it looks, and about you have to have some kind of confidence as a leader. As long as you don't have that, the Conservatives have more confidence in Boris Johnson than Labour do in Keir Starmer, or any leader for the time being. Remember, they've been absolutely decimated in the last couple of years, totally annihilated, ripped to shreds. So it's going to take a rebuilding process, and then they'll find a leader that will say, okay, we built ourselves up now, let's go and attack the Conservatives. But until that time, the Conservatives, they're seemingly unstoppable now, basically.
So Jack, do you agree with that? Do you think there's any chance that the Labour Party will get into power with this trend of leaders?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, of course. I think that a lot can change. It's 4 years until the next election. The Conservatives are going to be seeing a bump in the polls at the moment because the vaccine rollout's going so well, and because we're coming out of lockdown. So looking at polling at the moment isn't particularly helpful, in my opinion. And looking at polling at the best of times isn't particularly helpful. But looking at polling 4 years to an election isn't helpful. And I think that to come back to something that you said, Basar, I think you made a lot of really, really good points. And I think the thing for me, looking at the Keir Starmer that I voted for in the Labour leadership election, and looking at the Keir Starmer now, they seem to me to be two different people. The Keir Starmer I voted for in the leadership election had a plan. He published a 10-point plan as to what he wanted to see. John McDonnell came out and said he was a socialist. This is Jeremy Corbyn's right-hand man, comes out and says that he has the record of a socialist. The Keir Starmer that we've seen in opposition has been very different to that. There's a long time to change that record. There's a long time to announce what you want to do. There's a long time to oppose the government in an effective manner. I think that they should be calling for an inquiry. I think that they should be outlining a plan as to what they want a recovery to look like. I think they need to be outlining a plan as to how to tackle the climate crisis coming out of the pandemic, how to deal with institutional systemic injustices, how to bridge the divides that we see across the country, whether that be north-south or in the devolved powers. I think these are the things that the Labour Party need to do if they have a chance of winning the next election. And in many ways, I don't think it necessarily matters specifically who the leader is, as long as that plan is published and as long as it's communicated effectively, they will have a chance. Because the Conservative Party might be polling well, but let's look at their record throughout the pandemic, and if it's picked apart properly, there's plenty of things that we can sit here and point out and that I think have been far more dangerous for the country than an ineffective opposition.
That's many good points, Jack. And I just wanted to ask you maybe a bit of a tricky question, because I think even with Corbyn's reign, it was a case of appeasing the non-London elites, right? That was the issue with or the battle that people had to face. But now, do you see what about the London, not everyone in London is elite, number one, right? There are many different people that make up London, different ethnic minorities, particularly, that's where many people reside, or in small cities. So what do you think actually about, if Keir Starmer was in front of you, or you had his job, and it's a case of like, okay, it seems like people are being pitted against each other, right? Helping the North, helping out of London, or helping Londoners who come from different walks of life. What would you do? You've got Black Lives Matter to prioritize to a degree. You've got ethnic disparities in COVID-19, pay, just in terms of we're still suffering from the ramifications of austerity measures. You've got knife crime that people anticipate will come back on the rise because, you've got all this sort of stuff. And then you've also lost your heartlands, in the North, who have guaranteed your position in British politics or popularity over time. You've got the disparities between the North and the South in employment, so many other different things happening there. And then in terms of even, again, manufacturing, ex-trade union heartlands as well. You've got so many different ways to kind of, quote unquote, level up the country.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that, Jack? Because yes, Keir, in his defense, I guess, supporting what he can or being moderate makes a lot of sense. You've got a lot of people here. So I think ultimately, when you respond, the ultimate question is there a split on our horizons here, Jack? Do you feel like you can't be a party for all? Or is it a case of just do it properly?
Well, I don't think you can ever be a party for all. I think there's always going to be people that are disappointed with the way that you lead. And that's just something in politics that you have to accept. There are always going to be people that don't like you and people that don't vote for you. To come to your point, I guess, if I was in Keir Starmer's position, what would I be doing? Yeah. I think that there are some key fundamental things that we can do to push the country forward coming out of the pandemic. First of all is a living wage. And so these responses and these conversations about the impact of the pandemic, but also a lot of the Conservative Party's policies over the last 10 to 15 years impacting people differently across the country. Fundamentally, the solutions are similar. We need a nationwide living wage so that people in the north of the country aren't being paid far less for doing the same job as you would in London, right? So you're starting to bridge that wage divide. To come to your point about sort of crime, inner city crime, gang violence, knife crime, county lines, I am in favour of vast drug reform in this country, legalising cannabis and taking those funds out of the hands of gangs and into the public funds would overnight cut away at gangs' income and therefore start to tackle violence. I think we need a major overhaul in our education system to help to tackle some of these things. Awareness about sexual violence, awareness about racial injustice, teaching our history properly. The climate recovery needs to be put at the forefront of any policy plan. I want to see a green industrial revolution. We have the opportunity in this country to be a global leader in renewable energy. Lots of more investment needs to be done in that. I went on Hamish's brilliant podcast to chat to him about that last week. And then investment in public services. We need to have an infrastructure overhaul, like you said, and then we can start to chip away at some of the root causes of the problems that we see. And I think build back from the pandemic in a more sort of positive way. And they are all that is all about policy implementation, telling people how I'm going to make your life better. And anybody can do that. It's not just about what you look like. Bernie Sanders has had a fantastic career of not looking particularly presentable or electable, but arguing for policies that would tangibly improve people's lives. And that's where I think any Labour leader or any political leader needs to base their leadership from.
That was great, Jack. I guess this is coming to the end of our debate right now, but I guess we should ask everyone just top 3 things, just quickly, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Top 3 priorities for Keir to rebrand, to take the Labour Party from 0 to hero. What are the top 3 things? Just top 3. It's the top of your head. Let's start with maybe Aaron, because I feel like Aaron feels like his list is quite long for Keir.
If I had to consolidate it down to 3, it would be to rebuild the image of himself as a leader, to rebuild the image of the Labour Party as a party, and to get back in touch or rebuild the trust of its core voters. That's what I would say.
Sounds good. Your one's very PR heavy. Different suit, different haircut, nails, lashes. I see you. Do what you got to do. Aaron, listen. The Queen is hiring a diversity czar, but I think it's for Keir, and I think you'll get the place.
You think so? Yeah, I might have to.
I think you got it. It's just to appeal to the BAME, Aaron. You've got this.
I don't know, man. I'm not really into affirmative action, but I might have to slide Keir from jerk chicken or some
that role.
Get that money. Get that money.
Work hard for the role, Aaron. Buy your bootstraps. You can do it.
What I can do.
Hamish, top 3 things. What do you think?
Okay, so the top 3 things, I would say he needs to get lessons on how to be charismatic. That's number 1. Number 2, I think he needs to invest. He needs to try and showcase the part that the Labour Party is for the NHS. The NHS. I can't say that word today. The NHS. And I also think that he needs to try and reclaim and try and support the North, the places that they've lost in terms of the last election in the North. That's I think the 3 priorities in that sense. No,
sounds good. Sounds good, Hamish. And Jack, you've given us many different things that Keir could do, but top 3, if he said, in elevator pitch, give me the answers, Jack.
I think my top 3 would be climate recovery. I would like to have seen a sort of alternative roadmap, and I think the Labour Party needs to do a better job of. I don't know, maybe this is a bit of a cop-out, selling what a Labour government would look like at the moment. I mean, that encompasses a lot of things, but maybe that says how much that they need to do, how much progress needs to be made. I don't know.
I mean, so basically, Jack is saying, just do whatever you do something.
Yeah, it needs to be policy focused. That's the main
something
thing. Policy focused. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I think the reason why it's been difficult to really even pinpoint, where it's gone wrong entirely is because, we're in a weird situation, before you want to critique them, you have to think about the context. But at the same time, about the context, you do feel like there are opportunities that haven't been taken up, unfortunately. And you can support Keir and still see the flaws in his actions. But I think as citizens of this world, I do think it's important for us to always remember that people say and do things to get into power, and sometimes they end up not being who we think they are. And I think it's better for our peers and our fellow citizens to admit that sometimes, to go, I voted for him, I believed of his potential, but right now he's not performing. Rather than, I think sometimes what happens is that you're pro Corbyn, and people don't want to admit that there's certain things that Corbyn did that didn't really work, and it's okay to say that. It's not about his potential, his competence, but you've got a team around you. These people aren't in isolation. They've got a team, hiring the good team, understanding how social media works, understanding the issues at hand, and owning the fact that, I'm siding with the North because I think they're a priority, but talking to those in London and saying, this is why I'm doing it, or vice versa, and saying, London, I'm supporting issues going on here, but I can't forget the North. But it's that, you know what I mean? It seems quite hot and cold every time. It's like all these things exist at the same time. And ultimately, I think even Jack spoke on it, they draw on for the same issues. If you improve schools, I'm sure everyone's schooling would go up by a certain degree. There needs to be targeted help, but help the NHS helps everybody. So it's not just about no one benefiting from each other's policies. But I think that was a good discussion. Afshan, do you have any other closing words on that?
Just going to say that in the last hour, Keir Starmer has come out with a statement about the race report, saying that he's reluctant to accept that the race report is reluctant to accept structural issues, and that he's really disappointed by the report, saying that there was a lot more that it needed to look into. So I don't know. Maybe my arguments in the last hour against Keir Starmer may have been. Maybe I jumped. I don't know. Maybe do you know what? Maybe he saw the polls and was like, "No, mate, I got to do something about it."
I'm just saying he told it. He said something. He's saying
yeah.
He should say, but he should say in Parliament though. I have to agree with Afshan though. He has to actually stand up in Parliament.
Where's the
Tweet
action?
on Twitter.
Words mean nothing. I have learned that from years of data. Absolute,
True.
Words mean nothing. I want to see action.
Yeah.
And on that note, we are coming to a close for this show. It's been an exciting, interesting, politically heavy show today, talking about whether or not Keir Starmer is a secret Tory. Let us know if you agreed or disagreed with any of our guests, and also, if you agreed and disagreed with us as hosts. And I'm the first one to admit that I may have been jumping a little bit too quickly on this Keir Starmer hate bandwagon, given that in the last hour he's just come out and said that he didn't like the race report that I've not read yet. So I, who knows, maybe I'll change my mind in another half an hour. But that's the beauty of this, that we're allowed to change our bio.
Exactly. And I think it shows that it's not the entirety of everyone that we dislike. You can only dislike what you see. And unfortunately for Keir Starmer, a lot of things he does is not seen. And people would argue in your defense as well. At the end of the day, it's 8 o'clock. This report came out earlier today, What are you doing that you can't say something about it or do something about it? But ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. When you're in opposition, it's easy to say these things. I'm against, because whatever the government do, you can say you're against it. But then what are you going to do now following up? Are you going to tweet again? Is he going to retweet again? Or are you going to summon people? I think Runnymede got a live or some sort of conversation on YouTube that's happening tomorrow morning. That type of, proactivity is showing that you care. We know that Keir can't solve racism. He can't solve poverty. He can't solve all these things overnight. But it's the trust that I need to have in you. Should there be an option? Should you have major decisions to make? I can trust you to lead or do it in a way that, affects change. So I think that's that. But again, it is hard. I don't know what I would do if I was Keir. What would you do if you were opposition? Everyone's like, Afshan's, oh my gosh, Afshan's gonna free all the black and brown people from prison. She's gonna legalize marijuana. She's gonna stop hate crimes. She's gonna improve schools. Then you get here, you're like, right, I'm feeling strong. Pandemic hits.
I still do all that stuff because that's what I've done over the past year. I've still worked. I haven't been furloughed. I've been working, 2-3 jobs, looking after people, trying to still get some exercise in, looking after myself. There's, we're doing it, and there are people that are doing it, and I understand if it's getting a bit too much for him, and he wants to be furloughed, or he wants a break. He wants to be furloughed. They're like, you know what? Just say, what? I'm not that rate. I want to take 3 weeks off, or I'm going to pass the baton on to Corbyn, which is the appropriate thing to do, or pass the baton on to somebody else that can lead better than I can. And that would have been a really, I'd have been like, what, Keir, I respect you for that, because you kind of checked in yourself and you were like, can't do this thing. I need a break. And pandemic is hitting everyone, right? And that's the thing, that it is hitting everyone, and it's hitting some people more than it's hitting others. And the fact is that regardless of what's happening in Keir's life, he's still in a more privileged position than a lot of people in this country. So I'm sorry, we can't use that defense with him. But I don't know, ask me again in another week's time and I might have changed my mind.
I definitely will. I think every conversation now is going to be Afshan. So what has Keir done this week? I think we should even have an internal poll of like how to break it down. Do you know what I mean? Like what has happened? And a lot of it will probably say nothing, to be fair. But let's keep our eyes on Keir. He might surprise us. He might come out and
have a Keir meter that kind of like is
I'm saying
Amanda scale. Like,
yeah.
They've been today.
Perry, right now it's giving him a bit of a, what's the one under medium?
Is that mango and lime?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mango and lime right now. Tastes nice. Do you know what I mean? If you remove all the responsibility he has to have.
I'm just bringing this comment back. They need curry sauce ASAP, and that's pretty true that there is.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I guess that's the end of it today. I guess like, comment, subscribe, tune in. Join us next week for another topical debate. Let us know what you thought about today. Is Keir a secret Tory? Is he what the Labour Party dreamed of? Has he failed? Should we give him another chance? Do you want a Keir meter? Does he need curry? Is he just mango and lime? Is he hot Perry? You know what I mean? Let us know. But I think that was great. And we should definitely visit here.
Yeah, and this is not the end of this conversation. So do join us on join.tcsnetwork.co.uk. The link is at the bottom of the screen right now. Do, like Pasea says, like, comment, and subscribe. And let us know still in the comments whether or not you agreed and disagreed. And we might have a chance to read out your comments next week in the show if it's relevant to the topics that we're talking about. You have been an amazing audience. We've been Pasea Twins and Afshan Sozaludi with the Common Sense Network. We will see you same time, same place next week. Ciao.
See you.